I walked into my fiancé's family dinner wearing scuffed flats and carrying a faded canvas bag, looking like a struggling designer barely paying rent. I let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe about my worth, but a single detail on the gift I brought made his father freeze. When the truth finally surfaced, I was not the one burning with shame. The entire room went cold, paralyzed by a reality they were not ready to face. My name is Claire Walsh, and at 32 years old, I have learned that the loudest thing you can wear into a room of wealthy people is poverty. I stood at the end of the long, winding driveway, the iron gates of the Caldwell estate towering over me like the entrance to a fortress that did not want to be breached. The biting wind off Lake Michigan whipped stray strands of hair across my face, stinging my cheeks, but I did not reach up to fix them. I had taken the number 213 bus from the city, a ride that smelled of damp wool and exhaust, and then walked the final mile and a half through this manicured suburb where sidewalks were purely decorative because no one here actually walked. My feet throbbed in my flats. They were cheap shoes, the kind with cardboard soles that disintegrated after a month of heavy use. I had scuffed the heels against the curb earlier on purpose. Over my shoulder hung a canvas tote bag, faded from black to a dusty gray, carrying my portfolio, a battered leather case I had actually retired 5 years ago. Inside were sketches from my earliest days, the ones that looked hungry and desperate. I could have taken a private car. I could have worn the cashmere coat hanging in the back of my closet, the one that cost more than the average mortgage payment in this zip code. But tonight was not about comfort. "I am not here to be approved," I whispered to the cold air, watching my breath plume out in a white cloud. "I am here to see clearly. Money has a way of acting like a fog filter on a camera lens. It softens edges. It makes people smile when they do not want to smile. It makes them laugh at jokes that aren't funny. I needed the fog gone. I needed to see the high-definition, jagged edges of the people who raised the man I loved." I saw Evan before he saw me. He was pacing on the front porch, illuminated by the warm golden glow of the gas lanterns flanking the massive mahogany double doors. Evan Caldwell, 35 years old, brilliant, kind, and currently looking like a teenager waiting for the principal to call his name. He checked his watch, then smoothed down the front of his sweater. He was the anomaly in this equation. Evan had a gentle way of moving through the world, as if he were afraid of breaking things. It was what drew me to him initially. But whenever the subject of his family came up, that gentleness curdled into a heavy, suffocating silence. He did not talk about them. He endured them. I crunched up the gravel driveway, the sound loud in the suburban stillness. Evan's head snapped up. Relief washed over his face, followed instantly by a flicker of anxiety as his eyes took in my appearance. "Claire," he said, rushing down the steps to meet me. He reached for my hands, his palms warm against my frozen skin. "You walked? From the bus stop? It is freezing out here." "It's fine," I said, my voice steady. "The walk clears my head." He looked at my thin coat, then at the canvas bag. He didn't say anything about them, because Evan was too polite to comment on what he perceived as my financial struggles. But I saw the worry in his eyes. He thought I was underdressed for the battlefield. He was right, of course. That was the point. "They are inside," Evan said, lowering his voice as if the hedges had microphones. "My mother is in a mood, the gala planning is stressful, and my father just got off a call with Tokyo." "Evan," I said, stopping him. I squeezed his hands. "Breathe." He let out a jagged exhale. "I just want tonight to go well. They are very particular. Claire, we talked about this. They have a certain way of doing things." "I know," I said, offering him a small, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I am particular too, just in a different way." He hesitated, searching my face for a moment, then nodded. He turned and led me up the stairs. The moment the heavy door swung open, the warmth of the house hit me, a dry, cedar-scented heat that smelled expensive. The foyer was cavernous, with marble floors that shone like a frozen lake and a chandelier that looked heavy enough to crush a sedan. "Mother? Father?" Evan called out. His voice echoed slightly. A woman emerged from the drawing room to our left. She was small, trim, and terrifyingly put together. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection, and she wore a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire freelance annual income, at least. The income I had told Evan about. This was Mrs. Caldwell. She stopped 5 feet away from us. Her eyes, a piercing shade of blue identical to Evan's, did not meet mine. Instead, they started at my scuffed shoes. They traveled up my legs, over the off-the-rack cotton dress that was slightly wrinkled from the bus ride, paused at the canvas bag, and finally landed on my face. It took her exactly 3 seconds to calculate my market value. "Evan," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, ignoring me completely for the first beat. "You kept us waiting." "Sorry, Mother," Evan said, stepping aside to present me. "This is Claire." Mrs. Caldwell turned her gaze on me full force, her lips curved up, but the smile didn't touch the rest of her face. It was a glass smile, hard, transparent, and cold to the touch. "Claire," she said, "so lovely to finally meet the mystery woman. You are remarkably brave to walk in this weather." "It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell," I said, extending my hand. She took it. Her hand was limp, her skin dry. She released me almost immediately, as if she were afraid poverty might be contagious through skin contact. "So simple," she murmured, half to herself but loud enough for me to hear. "Charming, really." A man appeared behind her, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that had been tailored to within an inch of its life. Mr. Caldwell. He had the kind of presence that sucked the air out of a room. He walked toward us with a heavy, purposeful stride. "Sir," I said, nodding. He didn't smile. He extended a hand, and when I took it, he didn't shake it like he was welcoming his son's future wife. He shook it like we were concluding a minor business transaction, one he wasn't particularly interested in. 2 pumps, firm, dismissive. "Evan says you are in the arts," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Design," I corrected gently. "Branding and systems." "Freelance," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a label. "Rough market for that. No stability." "I manage," I said. "I am sure you do," he said, and his eyes drifted over my shoulder to the canvas bag again. The judgment was so thick I could practically taste it. It tasted like metal. "Come," Mrs. Caldwell said, turning on her heel. "Dinner is almost ready. Let us sit in the living room first. Brielle will be down shortly." As they turned to walk deeper into the house, Evan shot me an apologetic look. He touched the small of my back, guiding me forward. I stepped further into the foyer, my eyes scanning the space. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it was the kind of beauty that felt staged, like a museum exhibit where nothing was meant to be touched. And then I saw it. On a side table made of dark walnut, sitting alone next to a vase of white lilies, was a folder. It was a thin, cream-colored legal file. It wasn't part of the decor. It had been placed there recently, squarely in the center of the table, positioned to be seen but not immediately discussed. I knew that shape. I knew that thickness. In my line of work, my real line of work, I dealt with contracts, acquisitions, and mergers daily. I knew exactly what a document looked like when it was waiting for a signature that would strip someone of their leverage. It was an ambush. Sitting there in plain sight, I felt a coldness settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the wind outside. I looked at Evan's back as he followed his parents. He was walking with his head slightly bowed, already shrinking into the role of the obedient son. I tightened my grip on my canvas bag. I crossed the threshold from the marble foyer onto the plush Persian rug of the living room. If they think people are price tags, I thought, letting my gaze linger on the back of Mr. Caldwell's head, tonight they are going to misread the label. I grew up in a place where you could tell the season by the smell of the air, wet earth in the spring, burning leaves in the autumn, and the sharp, metallic scent of snow before it fell in the winter. It was a small town in the Midwest, the kind of place where the water tower was the tallest structure for 20 miles. My father repaired signage for local businesses. He spent his life on a ladder, smelling of paint thinner and cold iron, his hands permanently stained with the colors of other people's names. My mother was a school librarian who believed that the Dewey Decimal System was not just a way to organize books, but a moral framework for living. We were poor, but not the desperate kind of poor that makes the news. We were the quiet, dignified kind of poor, where you reused aluminum foil and turned the heat down to 62 degrees at night, from a young age. I was addicted to structure. My father taught me that if you did not measure the frame correctly, the sign would fall, no matter how beautiful the lettering was. My mother taught me that information was useless if you could not find it. I did not fall in love with design because I wanted to make things pretty. I fell in love with it because I wanted to make things work. I saw the world as a series of broken grids that needed realigning. I went to college on a full academic scholarship and worked 20 hours a week in the cafeteria to pay for supplies. While my classmates were buying imported markers and fancy sketchbooks, I was scavenging leftover paper from the print lab. I learned to be efficient because I could not afford to be wasteful. The early years of my career were a lesson in humility. I lived in a studio apartment that was basically a closet with a window, eating instant noodles 3 times a day. I remember chasing a client for $600 for 3 months. When he finally paid, he threw the check at me like he was doing me a favor. I cashed it and bought a winter coat. That was the reality of the freelance life. You eat what you kill, and sometimes you starve. But I was good at what I did. I didn't just design logos, I built systems. I started a small branding studio, working out of my living room. I didn't chase the glamorous fashion clients. I went for the mid-size manufacturing companies, the logistics firms, the businesses that were unsexy but had cash flow. I redesigned their invoices to reduce errors. I color-coded their warehouse signage to speed up packing. I sold them efficiency disguised as design. Slowly, the money started to come in. But instead of upgrading my apartment or buying a luxury car, I looked for the next broken grid to fix. 5 years ago, I found a local printing and packaging workshop that was bleeding money. The owner was a craftsman, not a businessman. He was weeks away from bankruptcy. I didn't just design for him. I bought in. I used every cent of my savings to buy a 40% stake in the business. Silently, I didn't put my name on the door. I put my brain in the office. We optimized the supply chain. We automated the binding process. We pivoted from printing flyers to creating high-end, custom packaging experiences for direct-to-consumer brands. It turns out, when people buy a $300 pair of headphones, they want the box to feel like a ritual. We sold them that ritual. Today, that struggling workshop is a regional hub for logistics and packaging. I own 3 separate entities: the branding agency, the experience design consultancy, and the packaging facility. They operate under different holding companies. They have different CEOs, but the equity flows back to one place. I set it up this way on purpose. My legal name is on the tax returns, but my face is not on the website. I can walk into my own factory, and the floor manager just thinks I am a consultant checking the metrics. I prefer it that way. The decision to hide my wealth wasn't born out of paranoia. It was born out of observation. I remember the first time I made a significant sum of money, a bonus from a tech startup I had helped brand. I took a friend out to dinner, and when the bill came, I paid it without looking. The next week, that friend asked for a loan. The week after that, she made a joke about how I could afford to pay for the movie tickets. The dynamic shifted. The kindness in her voice had developed a sharp edge of expectation. I realized then that money is a loud noise. It drowns out conversation. It changes the way people look at you. They stop seeing a person and start seeing an opportunity. So, I built a filter. I maintained a modest apartment. I drove a reliable, 4-year-old sedan. I wore clothes that were clean but undistinguished. I kept my struggling freelancer persona because it was the only way to get honest data. When you are perceived as having nothing to offer, people show you who they really are. They don't bother to put on a performance. If someone respects you when you are wearing a $20 dress and riding the bus, their respect is real. If they only smile when they see the black credit card, their respect is a transaction. Evan fell in love with the Claire who clipped coupons and worried about rent increases. That meant he loved me, not the safety net I could provide. That was the only security I cared about. But standing in the Caldwell's living room, watching his father look at me like I was a bad investment, I felt a familiar steeliness in my spine. It was the same feeling I had when I was 12 years old. Holding the ladder for my father in the freezing wind, making sure the sign didn't slip. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money. I had a portfolio of assets that could buy this house twice over if I liquidated the right accounts. But they didn't know that, and that was my power. True wealth, I had learned, was not about the number in the bank account. It was about the ability to walk away. It was the freedom to stand in a room full of people who thought they owned you and know, with absolute certainty, that you could leave at any second and never look back. Tonight, I was testing the structural integrity of this family. I was measuring the frame, and if it was rotten, I wouldn't try to paint over it. I would let it fall. We met 8 months ago at a workshop on user experience design in a converted loft downtown. It was the kind of event where people wore thick-rimmed glasses and used words like haptic feedback and frictionless interface without a hint of irony. The instructor had spent 20 minutes analyzing the curvature of a specific brand of electric toothbrush, explaining how it revolutionized morning routines. I was trying to suppress a yawn when the man sitting next to me leaned over. He was wearing a soft gray sweater and smelled faintly of sandalwood and dryer sheets. "I think if you need a diagram to explain how to brush your teeth," he whispered, his voice low and amused, "then the design has already failed, hasn't it?" I choked on my lukewarm water. It wasn't the joke itself. It was the delivery. It was smart without being mean. Observational without being arrogant. That was Evan. We grabbed coffee afterward at a place around the corner. I expected him to be another creative director looking to network or a startup founder looking for a co-founder to exploit. Instead, he told me he worked for Northbridge Systems, a medical technology firm that specialized in imaging software. It sounded incredibly stable and incredibly boring, which was exactly why he was at the workshop. He wanted to understand why things looked the way they did. "I spend all day looking at code," he told me, wrapping his hands around his mug. "I want to know why people touch things, why they pick up one object and ignore another. It fascinates me." He asked me why I chose the font for my portfolio. He asked me why I preferred matte finishes over gloss. He never asked me who my biggest client was. He never asked me what my hourly rate was. In a city where the second question is usually, "What do you do?" and the third is, "Does that pay well?" Evan was a relief. He was interested in the architecture of my mind, not the balance of my bank account. I told him I was a freelance designer. I said I picked up jobs here and there, that I kept my overhead low and lived simply. It was technically true. I just omitted the part about the holding companies and the logistics contracts. "That sounds freeing," he had said, and he meant it. "My life is very structured." I learned quickly that structured was a polite word for controlled. Evan came from the kind of family that had a family crest and actually used it on their stationery. His father was a senior partner at a law firm that handled mergers for companies that owned countries. He lived by a code of image and honor, which I soon realized meant that nothing messy was ever allowed to happen in public. His mother ran the Caldwell Arts Initiative, a foundation that decided which starving artists deserved to eat that year. And then there was Brielle. I had only met his younger sister once, briefly, over a video call that felt more like a deposition. Brielle was 28, sharp as a piece of broken glass, and worked in PR for a luxury fashion house. Within 3 minutes of meeting me, she had asked where I bought my earrings and then smirked when I said they were vintage. She didn't like people who didn't come with a pedigree. She liked things to be categorized, labeled, and priced. I was an unlabeled item, and that made her nervous. The problem wasn't that Evan came from money. I had dated rich men before. Usually, they were just boring. The problem was that Evan shrank when he was around them. It started with small things. When we first started dating, he showed a picture of us to his mother. She had apparently remarked that I looked refreshingly simple. When Evan told me this, he didn't roll his eyes. He didn't get angry. He just relayed it like it was a weather report. "She means it as a compliment," he had said, looking at his shoes. "She likes that you are not pretentious." "Evan," I had replied, keeping my voice even, "calling someone simple isn't a compliment. It is a dismissal." He went quiet. That was his defense mechanism. The silence. Whenever the friction between his family's expectations and his own reality became too hot, he just shut down. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He just waited for the subject to change. I saw it again when we discussed the dinner. He had warned me for 2 weeks. "Please just wear something conservative," he had said. "My dad has opinions on necklines, and maybe don't mention the client who didn't pay you last month. Mother worries about stability." I'm not going to lie to them. "Evan," I had said. "No, of course not," he stammered. "Just edit, for peace." He loved me. I knew he did. He loved the way I saw the world. He loved my independence. He loved that I didn't need him to buy me things. But I was starting to realize that his love had a ceiling, and that ceiling was painted by his parents. I sat on the edge of my bed the morning of the dinner, looking at the invitation. Thick cardstock, engraved lettering. It felt less like a dinner invite and more like a summons to court. "They are just protective." Evan had texted me an hour ago. "They want the best for me." I put the phone down. That was the core of the issue. They believed that the best was a specific socioeconomic bracket. They believed that wealth was a character trait, and the lack of it was a character flaw. And the terrifying part was that Evan, despite his kindness, despite his gentleness, had never once told them they were wrong. I wasn't going to this dinner to charm them. I wasn't going to win them over with my wit or my potential. I was going because I needed to know if the man I wanted to marry was capable of standing beside me, or if he would always stand one step behind, safely in the shadow of his inheritance. If they looked at me and saw a broke designer, that was fine. I could handle their judgment. What I couldn't handle was Evan's silence. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. No makeup, hair in a messy bun, the gray dress that had seen better days. I looked like exactly what they feared their son would bring home. "Okay, Evan," I whispered to the empty room. "Let us see who you really are." The phone rang at 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing a logistics contract for the packaging facility, my desk covered in red-lined documents, but when I saw the caller ID, I cleared my throat and let the persona slide into place. "Hello, Mrs. Caldwell," I said, pitching my voice slightly higher, a little more eager than usual. "Claire, dear," she purred. The line was crystal clear, no background noise, which meant she was calling from the landline in her study, the room with the soundproofing. "I hope I am not interrupting anything vital. I assumed that with your flexible lifestyle, you would be available." The word flexible was doing a lot of heavy lifting. In her vocabulary, it was a synonym for unemployed or desperate. "Not at all," I lied smoothly, sliding a $1 million contract under a stack of magazines. "I am just finishing up some sketches. I can always make time." "Wonderful," she said. "I was just finalizing the menu for Friday. Since you are bringing yourself, I thought perhaps you could bring along that little portfolio Evan mentioned. We would love to see what you actually do. It is so hard to visualize freelance work." "Of course," I said. "I would be happy to share." "Oh, and Claire? Do not worry about dressing up. It is just a cozy family dinner. Come as you are. We want to know the real you." The call ended with a soft click. I stared at the phone. "Come as you are" was a trap. If I dressed up, I was trying too hard. If I dressed down, I was disrespectful. There was no winning move on her board, so I decided to play on my own. I went to my closet and pushed past the silk blouses and the tailored wool trousers. I reached for the back, pulling out a gray cotton dress I had bought 5 years ago at a discount outlet. It was clean, but the fabric had lost its sheen, and the hem was slightly uneven. I paired it with tights that had a small snag near the ankle, invisible if you weren't looking, glaring if you were judging. Then came the gift. Standard etiquette for meeting the parents suggested a bottle of wine or a bouquet of flowers, but I wanted something that felt personal. Something that screamed, "I made this with my own hands because I cannot afford to buy you something expensive." I chose an artisanal candle from a small batch I had commissioned for a client's holiday gift basket 2 years ago. It was high quality, but I wrapped it myself in brown butcher paper and tied it with a piece of twine. It looked rustic. It looked like something sold at a folding table at a farmer's market. It was perfect. I spent the next 2 days building my defense. I sat at my kitchen island with a notebook, treating this dinner like a hostile board meeting. I wrote down the probable angles of attack. Financial stability. Do you have a retirement fund? Answer. I save what I can. Career longevity. What happens when you get older and clients want younger designers? Answer. I hope to build a reputation that lasts. The wedding. How do you envision the scale? Answer. Something intimate. I practice my tone. I needed to be polite but vague. I could not lie. I refused to lie. But I would not give them the ammunition of the full truth. If I told them I owned 3 companies, the interrogation would shift from, "Is she good enough?" to, "How can we use her?" I didn't want to be an asset. I wanted to be a person. On Thursday night, Evan came over. He looked like he hadn't slept. He paced around my small living room, picking up throw pillows and putting them back down. "My mother is in rare form," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "She has been rearranging the seating chart for 3 days, for 4 people. It makes no sense." I handed him a mug of tea. "It makes perfect sense. Evan, control is a way of managing anxiety." He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that usually made my heart melt. Tonight, they just made me feel tired. "If she says anything sharp, please, Claire, don't take it to heart. She doesn't mean it. It is just her way." I took a sip of my own tea, watching him over the rim. "I do not take things to heart. Evan, I take notes." He frowned, not understanding. "What does that mean?" "It means I listen. I observe. How people treat you when they think you have no power is how they truly are." He sighed, sitting down heavily on my sofa. "It will be fine. Just you, me, Mom, and Dad. We will eat. We will talk about the wedding date, and we will go home." My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from a shared calendar app Evan and I used. He had synced his personal calendar with mine a few months ago so we could coordinate dates, and he often forgot it was there. An update had just popped up for Friday night. Dinner at home, 7 p.m. Attendees, Mom, Dad, Evan, Claire. Notes. Aunt Catherine and Mrs. Sterling confirming attendance. I froze. I tapped the screen to expand the note. "Evan," I said, my voice very quiet. "Who is Mrs. Sterling?" Evan went pale. He looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. "Oh, I didn't think you would see that." "Who is she?" "She is a friend of the family. She is on the board of the Arts Initiative with my mother." "And Aunt Catherine?" "My father's sister, the one who manages the family trust." I set the phone down. "You told me it was just us. You said, cozy family dinner." "It is," Evan pleaded, leaning forward. "They just happened to be in town. Mother thought it would be nice for them to meet you. They are important to the family." "No, Evan," I said, standing up. "They are not just in town. Mrs. Sterling is a social gatekeeper and your aunt manages the money. This is not a dinner. This is an appraisal." "You are overreacting," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? They are bringing in a jury, one to judge my social standing, one to judge my financial risk." I walked to the window and looked out at the streetlights. I should have been angry. I should have canceled. But instead, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. If they wanted to turn a family meal into a due diligence process, then I would respect their wishes. I would undergo the audit. But audits work both ways. Okay, I said, turning back to him. Okay? He asked, surprised. You are not mad? I am fascinated, I said. If they want to bring in experts to assess me, that is their right. But Evan, you need to understand something. What? I am going to assess them back. I looked at the poor outfit hanging on my closet door. It wasn't just a costume anymore. It was a uniform. I was going undercover in plain sight. Pick me up at 6, I said. And Evan, don't tell them I know about the guests. Let them think I am walking in blind. He nodded, looking relieved that the fight hadn't escalated, completely missing the fact that the war had just begun. I sat back down at my desk and opened a new page in my notebook. I wrote 2 names at the top, Catherine and Sterling, if they were coming to dissect a broke freelancer. They were going to be very disappointed, but if they were coming to underestimate Claire Walsh, they were going to get exactly what they asked for. I picked up the pen. Game on, I wrote, then I underlined it twice. The interior of the Caldwell estate was less a home and more a curation of expensive emptiness. We moved from the foyer into the formal living room, a space dominated by white upholstery and glass surfaces that seemed to scream, "Do not touch." There were no personal photographs on the mantel, no dog-eared books on the side tables, no stray coats draped over chairs. It was clinically beautiful. The kind of perfection that made you afraid to exhale too loudly. The air was kept at a precise, chilly 68 degrees, presumably to preserve the artwork that lined the walls like silent sentinels. Mrs. Caldwell gestured for me to sit on a cream-colored love seat that looked as hard as a park bench. As I settled in, smoothing the skirt of my cotton dress, she remained standing for a moment, her eyes doing another sweep of my attire. "You have such a rustic charm, Claire," she said, the compliment landing with the soft thud of a dead bird. "It is very brave to be so unconcerned with trends. I suppose in your line of work, being bohemian is expected." "I value function, Mrs. Caldwell," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I find that if the foundation is strong, the decoration matters less." She smiled, a tight tightening of the skin around her eyes. "Of course, but presentation is its own form of function, isn't it? When you officially join the family, we can help you with that. I have a stylist who works wonders with simpler frames. We can upgrade your wardrobe to something more befitting Evan's partner." She made it sound like she was offering to renovate a crumbling kitchen. Beside me, Evan shifted his weight but said nothing. Before I could respond, a young woman entered the room. She was striking, with hair so glossy it looked like liquid ink, and a dress that I recognized from the runway shows in Milan last season. This was Brielle. She didn't walk. She glided, her gaze locking onto me with predatory interest. "So this is the designer," Brielle said. Bypassing a hello entirely, she sat across from me, crossing her legs with military precision. "Evan says you do branding. Where did you study? Parsons? RISD? "I went to State," I said, "and I learned on the job." Brielle's eyebrows shot up, simulating surprise. "Oh, State. That is practical. The market is so flooded with designers right now, isn't it? Everyone with a laptop thinks they are an artist. It must be exhausting competing for scraps." "The competition is only exhausting if you are offering the same thing as everyone else," I said, meeting her eyes. "I find that quality creates its own market." Brielle let out a short, dry laugh. "That is a very romantic way to look at it. I suppose when you are freelancing, you have to tell yourself whatever keeps you going." Mr. Caldwell walked over to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a scotch. He didn't offer me one. He turned to the room, swirling the amber liquid. "The thing about markets," he boomed, addressing the air rather than me directly, "is that they are controlled by relationships. Competence is the baseline, of course. But success? Success is about who is on your board, who signs the checks, who invites you to the table." He took a sip, his eyes finally flickering to me. Evan tells me you don't have a board. Claire, just you. Just me, I confirmed. Risky, he said, shaking his head. No oversight, no leverage. In my world, if you are not leveraged, you do not exist. In my world, I countered softly, if you are not leveraged, you are free. The room went quiet for a beat. Mister? Caldwell looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and amusement, like a cat watching a mouse try to stand on its hind legs. Dinner is served, the housekeeper announced from the doorway, breaking the tension. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with enough silverware to perform a minor surgery. I sat next to Evan, who was staring intently at his water glass, as if the secrets of the universe were drowning in it. The first course was a consommé, served in china so thin I could see the shadow of my spoon through it. For the first 5 minutes, the conversation was superficially polite. We talked about the weather, the traffic, the unseasonable cold, but as the soup bowls were cleared, the gloves came off. So, Claire, Mrs. Caldwell began, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. Let us talk about the future. Evan has a very trajectory-focused career. How does your gig work fit into that? My work is quite stable, I said. Stable is a relative term, isn't it? She pressed, her voice dripping with faux concern. I mean, without a corporate ladder, without benefits, without a guaranteed salary, it must be stressful. Do you worry about being a burden? I felt Evan stiffen beside me. This was his cue. This was the moment he was supposed to say, Claire is the most capable person I know, or she built a business from nothing. Instead, he looked at his mother and said, Mom, the soup is delicious. The silence from his side of the table was louder than a scream. I am not a burden, Mrs. Caldwell, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming steelier. I carry my own weight, and I have never asked Evan for a cent. Not yet, Brielle chimed in, swirling her wine. But marriage is a legal merger, isn't it? Assets become shared, liabilities become shared. It is just basic economics. Brielle, Evan murmured, that is enough. I am just asking the questions we are all thinking. Evan, she snapped back, someone has to be the adult here. I think what Brielle means, Mrs. Caldwell interrupted, cutting off whatever weak defense Evan was about to mount, is that we want to make sure you are realistic. We have seen this before. Artists who think love pays the mortgage. It is charming in movies. But in our circle, it is a liability. I looked at Evan. He was cutting his meat with intense concentration, refusing to look up. He was terrified. He was 35 years old, a grown man, and he was terrified of upsetting the ecosystem that kept him comfortable. I realized then that they didn't want to know who I was. They didn't care about my favorite books, or my childhood, or what made me laugh. They were not trying to understand a new family member. They were trying to define a problem. I was a variable they couldn't calculate, so they were trying to force me into a box labeled dependent, so they could manage me. I assure you, I said, placing my silverware down with a deliberate click. I am very realistic. I deal with reality every day. It is often the people who live in bubbles like this who lose touch with how the world actually works. Mrs. Caldwell's smile vanished. Her eyes went flat. We are a family that values tradition and order. Claire, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the table like a draft. We support those who join us. We are very generous, but that generosity is reserved for those who know their place. We help people if they know how to listen. She let the threat hang there, garnished with a smile. Be small, she was saying. Be grateful. Be obedient. And maybe we will let you stay. I looked at the crystal chandelier above us, refracting the light into 1,000 fractured rainbows. I looked at Evan, who was still silent, and I smiled back at her. I am a very good listener, I said. You would be surprised at what I hear. The main course was roast duck with a cherry reduction, but to me, it tasted like cardboard soaked in vinegar. The conversation had shifted gears. We were no longer in the polite territory of small talk. We had crossed the border into a full-scale deposition, and Mr. Caldwell was the lead prosecutor. He set his knife and fork down, wiping the corners of his mouth with a linen napkin that was probably pressed by someone who earned less in a month than this dinner cost. "Let us get down to brass tacks. Claire," he said. His voice had lost the rumble of social pleasantry and taken on the flat, metallic edge of a boardroom interrogation. "We need to talk about the mechanics of your life. Freelancing is all well and good when you are 22, but you are in your 30s now. What does your retirement look like? Do you have a 401k? Do you have a diversified portfolio? Or are you just hoping the economy stays friendly forever?" I took a sip of water, buying myself 3 seconds. "I manage my own investments. Sir, I believe in putting capital into things that generate active returns." "Active returns," he repeated, tasting the phrase like it was a cheap wine. "That sounds like code for high-risk gambling, or worse, putting money under a mattress. You need stability. Claire, compound interest, blue-chip stocks, things that sleep well at night." "I do not like my money to sleep," I said, meeting his gaze. "I prefer it to work. I invest in value creation, systems, infrastructure, things that people actually need, regardless of what the stock market does on a Tuesday." It was a vague answer, purposefully so, but it was also the absolute truth. My manufacturing plants ran 24 hours a day. That was not sleeping money. Mrs. Caldwell chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Oh, listen to her. Value creation. It is very spirited, but spirited does not pay for orthodontics or private schools, does it?" She leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. "We have been talking, Evan's father and I. We understand that stepping into this family comes with certain pressures, visually, socially. We do not want you to feel overwhelmed by the cost of maintaining the Caldwell standard." She paused, waiting for me to look grateful. I just stared at her. "So," she continued, "we would like to offer you a monthly stipend, a visual allowance, if you will, for hair, dermatology, a proper wardrobe consultant, just so you do not feel out of place when you stand next to Evan." I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't the offer of money. It was the implication that my natural state was a form of pollution that needed to be cleaned up before I could be displayed in public. "That is very generous," Brielle added, smiling over the rim of her glass. "And honestly, Claire, if the freelance thing gets too unpredictable, I can make some calls. I know the HR director at a mid-level agency in the city. It is data entry mostly, but the benefits are solid. You would have to clock in, of course, but at least you would know where your next check is coming from." They were dissecting me. One was offering to buy me a new face. The other was offering to buy me a cubicle. I looked at Evan. He was staring at his duck. His knuckles were white where he gripped the table edge. He heard every word. He heard his mother imply I was unpresentable. He heard his sister imply I was unemployable. "Say something." I willed him. "Tell them I am brilliant. Tell them I am proud. Tell them to stop." But Evan did not speak. The silence stretching between us was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and louder than any insult his family could throw. It was the sound of a man deciding that his comfort was more important than my dignity. "Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, signaling the end of the appetizer round. He reached under the table and produced the folder I had seen in the foyer. He placed it on the white tablecloth. It looked violent against the pristine fabric. "Since we are being practical," he said, sliding the folder across the mahogany toward me, "we should get the administrative details out of the way. This is a standard prenuptial agreement. Our lawyers drafted it. It protects the family trust, Evan's future inheritance, and the real estate holdings." He tapped the cover with a thick finger. "It is very standard, boilerplate, really. We would like you to sign it now. Get it out of the way. Keep things neat." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at Mr. Caldwell. "Neat?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it carried, "You want to sign a legal document that defines the end of a marriage before it has even begun. Just to make things neat? The clinking of silverware stopped. The room went dead silent. It is not about ending the marriage, Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice tightening. It is about clarity. It is tradition. Claire, everyone in this family signs one. We are simply protecting what is ours. I understand protecting assets, I said. But you are not asking me to review a contract with my own counsel. You are sliding it across a dinner table like a side dish. You are asking me to sign away my rights without reading the fine print because you think I'm desperate enough to agree to anything just to stay in this room. It is for your own good, Mr. Caldwell said, his tone shifting from professional to patronizing. It prevents confusion. If you have nothing to lose, correct? This just confirms that tradition, Mrs. Caldwell repeated, as if the word itself was a spell that shut down all argument. Tradition is not an excuse for disrespect, I said. I saw Brielle's eyes widen. No one spoke to her parents like that. Disrespect? Mr. Caldwell laughed, a harsh barking sound. You are a smart girl, Claire. I can see that, but do not make the mistake of romanticizing life. Love is a chemical reaction. Marriage is a contract. Money is what keeps the peace. If you sign this, you prove you are not after Evan for the wrong reasons. If you do not sign it well, then we have our answer, don't we? He leaned back. Crossing his arms, he looked satisfied. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I was a poor girl who had to choose between her pride and her meal ticket. I turned my head slowly to the left. I looked directly at Evan. He was looking at the folder. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at his father. He was looking at the paper as if it were a bomb he couldn't defuse. So he was just going to let it explode and hope he survived the blast. Evan, I said. He flinched. He finally looked up, his blue eyes filled with panic. Do you think this is neat? I asked. He opened his mouth. He looked at his mother, who was glaring at him with expectation. He looked at his father, who was waiting for compliance. Then he looked at me. Claire, he whispered, it is just a piece of paper. Maybe just look at it? For them? My heart didn't break. Hearts don't break. They just harden. I felt the last bit of softness I held for him calcify into something cold and sharp. He had made his choice. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a pacifier. He wanted me to swallow the insult so he wouldn't have to swallow his fear. I reached out and placed my hand on the folder. The room held its breath. They thought I was going to open it. Instead, I pushed it back. Just an inch, but that inch was a mile. I think, I said, my voice steady and clear, that you have miscalculated the cost of this dinner. I knew then that the evening was not going to end with dessert. It was going to end with a demolition, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. The transition from the dining room to the living room was a study in forced civility. We moved like actors in a play who had forgotten their lines, but were too professional to walk off stage. The air was thick with things unsaid, heavy with the weight of the prenuptial agreement that still sat, unsigned and unopened, on the dining table behind us. Mrs. Caldwell poured coffee from a silver pot. It was decaf, weak and watery. She handed me a cup with a saucer that rattled slightly against the porcelain, the only betrayal of her composure. Well, she said, settling into her armchair and smoothing her skirt. That was a spirited discussion. I suppose we should appreciate passion, even when it is misguided. She gestured to the coffee table where my gift sat. The brown butcher paper looked almost offensive against the polished mahogany and the crystal vases. It looked like a brown bag lunch in a jewelry store. I suppose I should open this, she said, her tone implying she was doing me a favor. Thank you. Claire, it is very thoughtful of you to bring something handmade. She reached for it with 2 fingers, as if she were picking up a dirty tissue. She untied the twine. The paper fell away to reveal the candle. It was a heavy amber glass jar, filled with a soy wax blend scented with tobacco and cedar. It was minimalist, elegant, expensive to produce, but Mrs. Caldwell didn't care about the scent. She turned the jar over in her hands, looking for a price tag she could sneer at. Instead, her eyes landed on the small, embossed label I had adhered to the bottom. It wasn't a store sticker, it was a gold foil seal of authenticity, produced by Walsh Systems. She squinted. Walsh Systems? Is this a craft fair brand? I do not recognize the name. Mr. Caldwell, who had been staring into the fireplace with a glass of brandy in his hand, turned around. The name seemed to catch in his ear like a burr. "Let me see that," he said. He walked over and took the candle from his wife. He wasn't looking at the wax. He was looking at the typography of the logo, the sharp, interlocking W and S. He stood very still. "Walsh," he muttered. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't the look of a predator anymore. It was the look of a lawyer who realizes he has misread the discovery documents. "This logo, this is the same branding as the logistics group that just acquired the packaging contract for the energetic drink client my firm represents. The ones who restructured the entire Midwest distribution chain last quarter." He paused, waiting for me to deny it. "It is a common name," he said, half to himself, "but the font is identical." He looked at me, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. "Are you related to them? A cousin? Is that who gives you your freelance work?" I set my coffee cup down. I didn't rush. I placed it perfectly in the center of the coaster. "I am not related to them, Mr. Caldwell," I said. "I didn't think so," Mrs. Caldwell interjected, letting out a small, relieved breath. "Probably just a coincidence, a copycat design." "It is not a coincidence," I continued, my voice calm, filling the room without raising a decibel. "And it is not a copycat. It is me." The room did not just go quiet. It went vacuum-sealed. Mrs. Caldwell set her cup down so hard that coffee sloshed over the rim and stained the white tablecloth. But she didn't notice. Brielle, who had been scrolling on her phone, froze with her thumb hovering over the screen. Evan stood up. It was a jerky, sudden movement, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked. "What?" Evan asked. His voice sounded thin. "What do you mean? It is you?" "I mean that Walsh Systems is my holding company," I said, looking directly at his father. "The design studio is one arm. The packaging facility is another. The logistics network is the third. I do not just design the label, Evan. I design the box. I print the box. I pack the box. And I ship the box to 40 states. Mr. Caldwell's face drained of color. He was doing mental math. Fast. He was calculating the valuation of the contract he had just reviewed 2 weeks ago. He knew exactly what those margins looked like. He knew that the freelancer sitting on his sofa didn't just have a retirement fund. She had an empire. "But, Mr. Caldwell stammered, a sound I never thought I would hear from him. "But I reviewed the ownership structure. It is an LLC managed by a blind trust." "Correct," I said. "I value my privacy. I find that when people know the numbers, they stop looking at the work." Then, the second realization hit him. I saw it happen. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. His eyes widened, and he actually took a step back. "The audit," he whispered. "Excuse me?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, her voice trembling. "What audit?" "The Arts Initiative," Mr. Caldwell said, turning to his wife, his voice hoarse. "The foundation is applying for that matching grant from the State Development Board. They appointed an external auditor to review our vendor list for conflicts of interest. The auditing firm outsourced the operational review to a third-party consultant." He looked at me with horror. "Walsh Systems," he said. "We are the ones reviewing your books, Mr. Caldwell," I confirmed. "My team is currently analyzing your vendor payouts. They flagged some irregularities with a recurring payment to a catering shell company. I believe the name on the invoices matches a friend of Brielle's." Brielle dropped her phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. She didn't pick it up. She looked at me, and for the first time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. You. Mrs. Caldwell gasped. She looked from me to her husband, then back to me. Her brain was trying to pivot, trying to find a way to rewrite the last 2 hours. She forced a smile onto her face, but it looked like a grimace. "Well," she said, her voice high and tight. "Well, this is quite a surprise. Claire, dear, why on earth didn't you tell us? We could have avoided all this unpleasantness about the prenuptial agreement. If we had known you were a peer, we would have treated you differently." It was the wrong thing to say. It was the absolute worst thing she could have said. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up my canvas bag, the bag they had sneered at, which contained the laptop that could probably buy and sell their debt. "That is exactly the point, Mrs. Caldwell," I said. "You shouldn't have to know my net worth to treat me with basic human decency. If you respected me as a person, there would have been no misunderstanding. You only respect the price tag. And now that you know the price is higher than you can afford, suddenly I am family?" "Claire," Evan said. He walked toward me, reaching out a hand. He looked devastated. "I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? We have been together for 8 months. You let me believe you were struggling. You let me worry about you." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had loved, the man I thought was different. "I didn't lie to you, Evan," I said softly. "I told you I lived simply. I do. I told you I worked hard. I do. I hid the numbers because I wanted to know if you loved me, or if you just loved the safety of a tax bracket. I do love you," he protested. "Do you?" I asked. "Because tonight, when your mother insulted me, you said nothing. When your father tried to force me to sign a contract to protect his money, you told me to sign it. You saw me drowning, Evan, and you didn't throw me a rope. You just told me to hold my breath so I wouldn't make a scene." I leaned in close to him, so close I could smell the expensive cologne his mother probably bought him. "I hid the money because I wanted love to come before strategy," I whispered. "But tonight, I sat at that table, and I watched strategy replace love in your eyes. You didn't choose me. You chose the path of least resistance." I stepped back. The room was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of a bomb crater. "I think I will take the bus home," I said. "I have a morning meeting with my audit team. We have a lot of invoices to review." I stood up from the sofa, the movement smooth and deliberate. I did not slam my hand on the table. I did not raise my voice to a scream. I simply gathered the strap of my canvas bag onto my shoulder. Then I turned and walked toward the door. Nobody moved to stop me. They were too busy standing in the wreckage of their own assumptions. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Caldwell," I said. "The duck was excellent. I apologize for cutting the evening short, but as I mentioned, I have a very early start tomorrow." Mrs. Caldwell scrambled to her feet, her napkin falling to the floor unnoticed. The panic in her eyes was almost pitiable. She wasn't looking at her son's fiancé. She was looking at the woman who held the magnifying glass over her family's reputation. "Oh, but Claire, please," she said, her voice pitching up into a desperate trill. "You cannot leave like this. We haven't even had the tart. It is pear and almond. We can just sit. We can talk. Properly this time. For fun." "I do not think fun is on the agenda tonight," I replied. "And I think we have said everything that actually matters. Good night." I walked out of the living room, through the foyer that smelled of expensive cedar, and out the heavy front door. I didn't look back at Mr. Caldwell, who was still staring at the candle jar as if it were a grenade. The night air was sharp, a slap of cold that felt cleansing after the suffocating heat of the house. I walked down the stone steps, my flats crunching on the gravel. I had made it about halfway down the driveway when I heard the door open again, followed by the sound of running footsteps. "Claire! Claire! Stop!" It was Evan. He had run out without his coat. He caught up to me near the gate, his chest heaving, his face pale under the streetlights. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. I didn't flinch. I just created space, a boundary. "Please," he gasped. You cannot just walk away. We have to talk about this. Do we? I asked. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I didn't brush it away. I think your parents made their position very clear, and I made mine clear. They were wrong, Evan said, his voice shaking. I know they were wrong. They were judgmental and rude, and I am sorry. I am so sorry. I looked at him. He looked like a little boy lost in a department store. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt a heavy, dull exhaustion. I do not want your apology, Evan, I said. I want an explanation. About what? About the silence, I said. I looked him dead in the eye. When your mother offered me an allowance to fix my face, you looked at your plate. When your sister implied I was a gold digger, you looked at the wall. When your father tried to bully me into signing away my rights, you told me to sign it. Why? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his hands. I froze. Why? I repeated. Because they are my parents, he whispered. I didn't want to cause a scene. I thought if we just got through it, we could fix it later. I hate fighting with them. Claire, you do not know what it is like. If I speak up, it disturbs the peace. It creates chaos. I was scared. Scared of what? I asked. Of losing your inheritance? Of losing their approval? No, he cried, looking up. Scared of being the bad son. Scared of losing the order. We do not yell in my family. We do not confront. We just manage. I nodded slowly. You manage? That is the problem. Evan, you treat conflict like it is a scheduling error to be smoothed over. I took a step closer to him, my voice low but cutting through the wind. Listen to me. Silence is not peace. Silence is just letting other people hurt me without consequence. When you stay quiet to keep the peace, you are not keeping the peace for me. You are keeping it for them. You are letting them fire bullets at me because you are too afraid to take the gun out of their hands. He flinched as if I had slapped him. Tears welled up in his eyes. I love you. You know I love you. I know you feel love, I said. But love is a verb, Evan. It is an action. And tonight, you did not act. I will fix it, he promised, reaching for me again. I will tell them. I will make them understand. No, I said, stepping back again. You are not going to fix this by explaining my bank account to them. If you only stand up for me because you found out I am rich, then you are exactly like them. I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs. Here is what is going to happen, I said. We are not getting married in June. Claire, no, he begged. We are postponing, I said firmly, indefinitely, and if you want there to be a wedding at all in the future, 2 things need to happen. First, we are going to couples counseling, not a priest, not your family friend, a professional who deals with enmeshment trauma. He nodded frantically. Okay, yes, anything. And second, I said, you are going to learn how to stand next to me, not behind me, not in front of me to hide me, next to me. You have to choose, Evan. You can be their good son, or you can be my husband. You cannot be both if their definition of a good son is a man who lets his wife be humiliated. A car turned down the street, its headlights sweeping over us. I checked my watch. I'm going to call a rideshare, I said. Do not follow me. I need to think. I left him standing in the driveway, shivering in his sweater, watching me walk away into the dark. The next morning, my phone was a constant source of vibration. I had 3 missed calls from Mr. Caldwell before 8 a.m., then came the texts from Mrs. Caldwell. Claire, dear, we are so distressed about last night. Please call us. We want to clear up this terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea about your professional standing. From Mr. Caldwell, I would like to arrange a meeting to discuss the audit and, of course, apologize for any awkwardness. We value family above all. I didn't reply. I didn't delete them, either. I archived them. Evidence. They weren't sorry they had treated me like dirt. They were sorry they had treated the auditor like dirt. There is a difference. I spent the morning working from my apartment. I had a video call with my operations manager at the packaging plant. And then I reviewed the preliminary report on the Caldwell Arts Initiative. The numbers were messy. Brielle's friend was charging 40% above market rate for catering services that, according to the logs, sometimes didn't even happen. At noon, I texted Evan, "Meet me at Joe's Diner on 4th. 1 hour." It was a deliberate choice. Joe's was loud, smelled of grease and old coffee, and the tables were sticky. It was a place where people went to eat cheap eggs, not to be seen. There was no atmosphere to hide behind, no crystal glasses to distract from the truth. I was sitting in a booth near the back when Evan walked in. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he was wearing a wrinkled shirt, which for Evan was equivalent to wearing a sign that said, "I have given up." He sat down opposite me. He didn't try to touch my hand. He just looked at me with a terrifying amount of vulnerability. "I didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did I." I admitted. I signaled the waitress and ordered 2 black coffees. "My parents are freaking out," he said. "Dad is pacing the study. Brielle is, I have never seen her like this. She is scared. Claire." "She should be," I said calmly. "But we are not here to talk about them. We are here to talk about us." Evan looked down at the scratched laminate table. He traced a groove in the surface with his finger. "I replayed the dinner in my head all night," he said softly. "Over and over. I watched it like a movie, and I saw it." "Saw what?" "I saw myself," he said. "I saw you sitting there, taking the hits, answering with so much dignity, and I saw me. I looked small. I looked like a child waiting for permission to speak." He looked up, and his eyes were wet. "I left you alone," he said. "I left the woman I love alone in a room full of sharks because I was afraid of getting bitten." I stirred my coffee. "Yes, you did. I do not want to be that man," he said. "I hate that man." "Then kill him," I said. It was harsh, but it was necessary. "I can't save you from them, Evan," I continued. "I have the power to destroy their reputation with a single report, but I cannot save you from their emotional grip. Only you can do that." "I know," he said. "I told them this morning that I was coming to see you. My mother told me to bring flowers. She told me to mention the family legacy. I told her to shut up." I raised an eyebrow. "You told your mother to shut up?" "I did," he said, a ghost of a smile appearing on his face. It felt terrifying, and then it felt good. "It is a start," I said. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over mine, waiting for permission. I didn't pull away, but I didn't turn my hand over to hold his. Either. Not yet. "I want to do the counseling," he said. "I want to do the work. I do not care about the money. Claire, I really don't. If you were actually broke, I would still be here begging you to forgive me." "I know," I said. "That is the only reason I am sitting here." "I want to be the one standing next to you," he said. "Please, let me try." I looked at him. I saw the fear, but I also saw the resolve. He was waking up. It was going to be a long, painful process. Unlearning 35 years of conditioning doesn't happen over a cup of diner coffee. But he was here. He was in the sticky booth, under the harsh fluorescent lights, facing the truth. "I do not need you to save me, Evan," I said, finally letting my hand rest on his. "I have never needed saving. I can buy my own house. I can fight my own battles. I can even ruin my own enemies." I squeezed his hand. "Just once." "I do not need saving," I repeated. "I need choosing. I need you to wake up every morning and choose me over the comfort of their approval. Can you do that?" He took a breath. "Yes, I can." "Good," I said. "Because the real storm hasn't even hit them yet, and when it does, you are going to need to know exactly which side of the line you are standing on." The Caldwell estate underwent a fascinating rebranding in the 48 hours following our disastrous dinner. It was as if someone had flipped a switch from hostile takeover to luxury customer service. Suddenly, My phone was not just receiving requests for meetings, it was receiving overtures of affection. Mrs. Caldwell sent a bouquet of white orchids that was so large it required 2 delivery men to carry it up the stairs of my apartment building. Attached was a card that read, "To our dearest Claire, looking forward to a fresh start." They stopped calling me Evan's friend and started using the word daughter in their voicemails, testing it out like a new pair of shoes they weren't sure fit yet. I recognized this tactic immediately, in the corporate world. This is what happens when a company realizes they have accidentally sued their biggest investor. It is damage control disguised as warmth. They were not sorry they had humiliated me. They were terrified that my audit team was going to dismantle their reputation. I sent the orchids back. I did not write a nasty note. I simply marked the delivery as refused by recipient. When Mrs. Caldwell tried to invite me to a private lunch at her club to bond, I declined. When Mr. Caldwell sent a revised version of the prenuptial agreement, this one significantly watered down, I didn't even open the file. I just replied that my legal counsel, which was me, was currently unavailable. I was not going to let them buy their way out of the discomfort. They wanted to skip to the part where we were all smiling in photos, but I was going to make them walk through the mud first. "I have a condition," I told Evan 3 nights later. We were sitting in my living room. He looked tired but clearer, like a man who was finally seeing the wires that held up the stage set of his life. "Name it," he said. "I want an apology," I said, "but not a private one. I want your mother to apologize to me in front of Brielle and your Aunt Catherine. The same audience that watched her dissect my financial status needs to watch her acknowledge my dignity." Evan nodded. He didn't flinch. "I will set it up." The meeting happened in the Caldwell Library. The air was stiff enough to crack. Aunt Catherine sat in the corner, looking uncomfortable. Brielle was pacing near the window, her usual sharpness replaced by a jittery, frantic energy. Mrs. Caldwell sat in her armchair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "We are just so sorry for the misunderstanding," Mrs. Caldwell began, her voice tight. "We simply didn't know—" "Stop," Evan said. The room froze. It was the first time I had ever heard him interrupt her. "It was not a misunderstanding, Mother," Evan said, his voice steady. "You insulted the woman I love. You treated her like a beggar because you thought she was poor. The only thing you misunderstood was her bank account balance. If she were actually poor, your behavior would still have been cruel. Apologize for the cruelty, not the calculation." Mrs. Caldwell opened her mouth to argue, but she looked at Evan's face and saw something she didn't recognize. A spine. She closed her mouth. She looked down at her lap. "I am sorry, Claire," she whispered. "I was unkind." It was a start. But while Evan was handling the emotional books, I was handling the financial ones. My team had been digging into the Arts Initiative's ledger for 3 days. The deeper we went, the more the numbers stopped making sense. It wasn't just messy bookkeeping, it was architectural fraud. I found a series of invoices from a vendor called Lumina Events. They billed for consulting, venue scouting, and strategic aesthetic management. The amounts were always just under the threshold that required board approval. $9,000 here, $8,500 there. Over 3 years, it added up to nearly $200,000. I ran a search on the business registration for Lumina Events. It was registered to a residential address in a neighboring suburb. I pulled up the street view. It was a condo complex. Then I cross-referenced the address with Brielle's social media history. 5 years ago. She had tagged a location at a bestie's housewarming. The address matched. The vendor was a shell. Brielle was funneling money out of her mother's foundation into her friend's account, and likely splitting the cash. This explained everything. It explained why Brielle had been so aggressive about the prenuptial agreement. It wasn't to protect the family from me. It was to protect herself from discovery. She knew that if I married Evan without a contract, I would legally be family. I might take an interest in the foundation. I might look at the books. She needed me to be an outsider, legally walled off from the finances, so she could keep bleeding the fund dry. The irony was staggering. She had accused me of being a gold digger while she was actively looting the family vault. In the days leading up to the annual gala, Brielle's behavior shifted dramatically. She started texting me emojis. She commented on my Instagram posts with hearts. She even offered to drive me to the venue so we could make an entrance together. It was the behavior of a cornered animal trying to make friends with the hunter. I didn't expose her immediately. An amateur flips the table. A professional waits until the other side has bet all their chips. I needed the timeline to be airtight. I needed to verify the bank transfers. I needed to prove that the events Lumina billed for never actually happened. I sat Evan down the night before the gala. I showed him the spreadsheet. I traced the lines from the foundation to the shell company to the friend. He stared at the screen for a long time. "Brielle?" he asked, his voice hollow. "She has a trust fund. She has a salary. Why?" "Because it is not about need," I said gently. "It is about entitlement. She thinks the money is hers to take. Rules be damned, and she projected that greed onto me." Evan put his head in his hands. "She was the one who pushed Dad to draft the prenup. She told him you looked hungry. She was projecting her own appetite onto you." "Yes," I said. He looked up at me. "What are you going to do?" "I am not going to ruin her life." "Evan," I said, "I do not believe in destroying people for sport, but I do believe in accountability. She is going to pay it back, all of it, and she is going to step down from the board. And if she refuses? Then I release the audit to the state attorney," I said. "But I am giving her a choice. That is more than she gave me." The invitation to the gala sat on my desk. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. The Caldwell Arts Initiative, Annual Benefit. Mrs. Caldwell had texted me that morning. "We are so excited to introduce you properly tonight. We have a table right at the front." She thought I was coming as a trophy, the successful, wealthy daughter-in-law who would validate their social standing. She thought the misunderstanding was over. She thought money had smoothed everything over, because in her world, money was the universal solvent. I picked up a pen and checked the box marked, "Accepts with pleasure." I was going to the gala. But I wasn't going as Evan's fiancé, and I wasn't going as a prop for their family photo. I was going as the person who held the lever to the trap door they were all standing on. "Are you ready?" Evan asked me. Standing in the doorway of my bedroom, he was wearing his tuxedo, but for the first time, he didn't look like he was wearing a costume. He looked like a man who knew exactly who he was. "Yes," I said, picking up my clutch. Inside was not a lipstick, but a folded single-page summary of the financial irregularities. "Let us go," I said. "I think it is time we had a real family conversation." I walked out of the apartment, leaving the broke designer behind forever. Tonight, I was the auditor, and the books were finally going to balance. The ballroom of the saint. Regis was a sea of black ties and sequins, illuminated by chandeliers that cost more than the average American home. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and the distinct, metallic scent of anxiety that always permeates a room where people are trying too hard to impress one another. I stood near the stage, wearing a gown I had bought 3 years ago for a design awards ceremony in Copenhagen. It was black, architectural, and severe. It was not a dress that asked for approval. It was a dress that commanded attention. Mrs. Caldwell was at the podium. She looked radiant, though I noticed a slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the microphone stand. She had spent the last hour introducing major donors, but now she turned her gaze toward me. Her smile was plastered on, a shield against the truth we both knew was sitting in her peripheral vision. "And finally," she announced, her voice chiming through the speakers, "I want to introduce someone very special, a young woman who reminds us that creativity is its own form of wealth. My son's fiancé, Claire. She comes from humble beginnings, a true bohemian spirit, and her story is just so inspiring." She gestured for me to come up. The room applauded politely. They saw what she wanted them to see. The charity case, the lucky girl who had snagged the Caldwell heir. I walked up the stairs. I took the microphone from her hand. I did not smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell," I said. My voice was steady, magnified by the sound system. "But I think we should clarify the nature of the inspiration tonight." I looked out at the sea of faces, the board members, the city councilmen, the socialites. "For the past 3 years," I continued, "this foundation has received a significant annual donation from an entity known as the Aurora Trust. It funds the youth mentorship program. It funds the gallery maintenance. It is the single largest line item in your operating budget." A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone knew the Aurora Trust. It was the mysterious benefactor that kept the lights on. "I am the Aurora Trust," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight. Mrs. Caldwell's smile vanished. Mr. Caldwell, standing near the front table, froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. "I founded the trust to support efficient, transparent arts management," I said. "And as the primary donor, I have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that every dollar is spent on the mission, which brings me to the condition of my continued support." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. I didn't wave it around. I just placed it on the podium. "Effective immediately, I am freezing all future donations until the board accepts a full, independent forensic audit and a restructuring of the executive committee." The room erupted into whispers. Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, his face pale. He was a lawyer. He knew exactly what forensic audit meant. It meant I wasn't just pulling funding. It meant I had found something. "You see," I said, leaning into the mic, "when I reviewed the preliminary financials this week, I found a pattern. Over $200,000 in 3 years paid to a vendor called Lumina Events for services that were never rendered. Venue scouting for galas that didn't happen. Consulting fees for projects that do not exist." I turned my head slowly and looked at Brielle. She was standing near the dessert table, clutching her purse so hard her knuckles were white. "The vendor is registered to a residential address," I said. "An address that belongs to a close associate of a board member." Brielle looked like she was going to faint. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under the heat of the lights. "Brielle," Mrs. Caldwell gasped, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Tell them it is not true." But Brielle couldn't speak, and in that moment, the second twist of the knife revealed itself to me, sharp and clear. "You wanted me to be poor," I said, speaking directly to Brielle now, though the microphone carried my voice to every corner of the room. "You pushed for the appraisal. You pushed for the prenuptial agreement. You treated me like a beggar not because you were a snob, but because you were terrified." I took a step closer to the edge of the stage. "You thought that if I were a struggling designer, I wouldn't understand balance sheets. You thought I would be too grateful to be here to ask questions. You used your brother's marriage as a smokescreen to hide your embezzlement." The crowd gasped. It was the sound of 100 social climbers realizing they were witnessing a public execution. Mrs. Caldwell looked at her daughter, then at me. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the desperate need to save the family name, but I wasn't there to destroy them. I was there to teach them. "However," I said, softening my tone just enough to let the tension breathe, "I believe in second chances. I believe in correction, not destruction." I looked at Mr. Caldwell. He was staring at me, and for the first time, there was no judgment in his eyes. There was relief. He realized that I had the evidence to send the police to his house, but I had chosen to bring it to the podium instead. I was keeping it in the room. "The audit findings can remain internal," I said, "provided that full restitution is made to the foundation within 30 days, and provided that the board member in question resigns tonight, effective immediately for personal health reasons." I looked at Brielle. "It is a graceful exit. Brielle, I suggest you take it." Brielle nodded. It was a jerky, broken movement, but it was a yes. She turned and walked out of the ballroom, her head down, stripping herself of the title she had stolen. I stepped back from the podium. I had expected to feel triumphant, but mostly, I just felt clean. I had scrubbed the stain out of the fabric. Then, movement caught my eye. Evan was walking up the stairs. The room held its breath. Was he going to defend his sister? Was he going to yell at me for humiliating his family? He walked past his mother. He walked past his father. He came to stand right next to me. He didn't stand in front of me to protect me, and he didn't stand behind me to hide. He stood shoulder to shoulder. He took my hand. His grip was firm. "My fiancé is generous," Evan said into the microphone. His voice didn't shake. "More generous than we deserve. We have spent years worrying about the cost of things, the cost of appearances, the cost of status. Tonight, we learned the cost of integrity." He looked at his parents. "Claire and I are postponing the wedding," he announced. Mrs. Caldwell let out a small sob. "We are postponing it until this family learns that respect is not something you buy." Evan continued. "And effective tomorrow, I am resigning from my position at the family firm. I will no longer be accepting any financial support from the estate. I am going to build my own life, with my own money, alongside a woman who knows how to build things that last." He looked at me, and he smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in a week. "Shall we go?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I think our work here is done." We walked down the stairs together. The room was silent, but it wasn't the awkward silence of a dinner party gone wrong. It was the heavy, respectful silence of a group of people who had just been forced to look in a mirror. "Mr." Caldwell nodded to me as we passed. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it was an acknowledgement. He knew I had spared them the worst of it. He knew I had just saved his foundation from his own daughter. We walked out of the ballroom, through the gilded doors, and into the cool night air. The valet was waiting, but I shook my head. "Let us walk," I said. We walked down the long driveway, leaving the lights and the noise and the false apologies behind us. I didn't feel like I had won a war. I felt like I had finally finished a renovation. I had stripped the house down to the studs, removed the rot, and now, finally, we could build something real. I squeezed Evan's hand. He squeezed back. I realized then that the most powerful thing you can own isn't a company, or a trust fund, or a seat at the head table. The richest person in the room is not the one who has the most. The richest person is the one who does not need permission to be respected. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment down below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and tap the like button to help us share this journey with even more people.